Family laughed at my $500 inheritance. Now it makes $187,000 a month. I never thought a Christmas card could be worth 40 acres and a fortune. But here I am, 3 years later, and that's exactly what it turned out to be. Let me back up. My Uncle Earl was what you'd call the family embarrassment. The kind of relative nobody talks about at Thanksgiving, unless someone's had too much wine and wants to start drama. For 20 years, the man lived alone on some property outside of town, doing God knows what, and the family treated him like he had the plague. My wife Linda's family especially. Her mother would literally change the subject if his name came up. Her brother Rick, the smug real estate agent who wore loafers without socks even in winter, used to call him the garbage hermit. I never understood the hostility. Sure, Uncle Earl was odd. He didn't show up to weddings or funerals. He drove an ancient Ford pickup that looked like it survived a war, but he never hurt anyone. He just wanted to be left alone. So every Christmas, I sent him a card. Nothing fancy. Just one of those generic ones from a drugstore with a snow scene and season's greetings printed inside. I'd write Merry Christmas, Uncle Earl, and sign my name. No request for money. No fake promises to visit. Just acknowledgement that he existed and was family. Linda thought it was stupid. She'd roll her eyes every December when she saw me addressing that envelope, but I kept doing it anyway. 15 years straight. Then Uncle Earl died. The call came from a probate lawyer I'd never heard of. Heart attack, apparently. They found him in his trailer 3 days later. The lawyer said there would be a reading of the will and that my presence was requested. Linda immediately assumed there was money involved. Her whole family did. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. You know that specific smell of places where important documents live. The kind of smell that makes you sit up straight automatically. Rick showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Linda's parents came too, her father in his usual golf outfit, her mother dripping with jewelry. Linda herself wore this tight smile she always put on when she thought she was about to get something good. They were all practically vibrating with anticipation. I was the only one who felt sad, not devastated or anything. I barely knew the man, but sad in that quiet way you feel when you realize someone went through their whole life without much warmth from the people who were supposed to care about them. The lawyer was this tired-looking guy in his 60s with reading glasses on a chain. He opened a folder, cleared his throat, and started reading. The room went silent when he got to the important part. Uncle Earl had left everything to me. The land, the business, something called Earl's Earth, whatever that meant, and all assets associated with it. The will was very specific. It said I was the only one who remembered he was a human being and not just a garbage pile. So I got everything. Everyone else got explicitly nothing. The lawyer actually read that part out loud. The word the will used was jack squat. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Linda's father exploded. He started going on about how this was ridiculous, how Earl was clearly not in his right mind, how we should contest it. Rick was doing math on his phone, probably calculating what 40 acres was worth. Linda just stared at me like I'd won the lottery. Except I hadn't. Not really. Because none of us knew what we were actually inheriting. The next day, Linda insisted we go see the property. She'd already started talking about selling it, buying a bigger house, maybe getting that SUV she'd been wanting. Rick volunteered to come along to do a professional assessment. He kept saying things like development potential and market comparables. I drove us out there in Linda's Ford Escape. The address led us down increasingly rural roads until we were basically in the middle of nowhere. 40 acres sounds like a lot until you're actually looking at it. It was a sprawling industrial wasteland, rusted metal buildings, ancient equipment sitting in mud, and mountains, literal mountains of organic material covered with tarps and black plastic sheeting. The smell hit us before we even got out of the car. It wasn't a normal garbage smell. It was earth and ammonia and something almost sweet underneath, like rotting fruit mixed with soil. Linda gagged immediately. She refused to open her door, just sat there with her hand over her nose, breathing through her mouth. Rick stepped out in his expensive leather shoes and immediately sank ankle deep into mud. I watched $300 worth of Italian leather get destroyed in real time. He started swearing, loud. The kind of swearing you do when you're more angry than you are reasonable. He slogged around for maybe 10 minutes, getting muddier and more furious, before announcing a professional opinion. This was a disaster, an environmental catastrophe waiting to happen. He used the term Superfund site, which I had to look up later. It means a place so contaminated that the federal government has to get involved in cleaning it up. He said there were probably millions in fines waiting to happen, that the EPA would shut this down in a heartbeat, that we'd be lucky if we didn't end up in jail just for owning it. Linda started crying in the car. The family dinner that night was an ambush. Linda's parent invited us over under the pretense of support, but it turned into a firing squad. Her father laid into me before we even finished the salad. He said I'd always been mediocre, always just barely getting by. But this was a new low. He actually used the word liability. Said I was a liability to the family now. That the smart move, the only move, was to disclaim the inheritance. Just walk away legally and let the state deal with it. Linda's mother nodded along, dabbing her eyes with a napkin like this was all so tragic. Rick had his pitch ready. He'd done research, he said. The property had $12,000 in back taxes owed. He generously offered to buy the whole thing for me for $500. Said he'd write it off as a business loss on his taxes, and I'd be free of the headache. He made it sound like he was doing me this enormous favor. Linda didn't defend me. Not once. She just sat there, and I could see her doing the calculation in her head, wondering if she'd married wrong, wondering if her family was right about me. I almost said yes. I was this close to agreeing to Rick's offer just to make everyone shut up and stop looking at me like I'd ruined Thanksgiving. But something bothered me. Not about the deal. About Uncle Earl. I couldn't stop thinking about those Christmas cards. 15 years of them. Where did they go? Did he throw them away? Did he even open them? I went back to the property alone the next morning. Told Linda I needed to look at something. She didn't ask what. She was already pulling away from me, emotionally. I could feel it. The trailer Uncle Earl lived in was a beaten-up single wide from maybe the 70s. Aluminum siding, tiny windows. The kind of place that's either freezing or boiling depending on the season. The door was unlocked. Nobody out here to steal from a dead man anyway. Inside was sparse. A cot, a hot plate, a small table with one chair. Everything was clean, though organized. Not what you'd expect from someone the family called crazy. And then I saw the wall. Every single Christmas card I'd ever sent him was there. Thumbtacked to the wall above the table in perfect rows. 15 cards. Some of them were yellowed with age. A few had smudges on them, like he'd touched them with dirty hands and then been careful not to mess them up more. But they were all there, arranged chronologically. The only decoration in the entire trailer. That's when I understood. Uncle Earl wasn't crazy. He wasn't a hermit because he hated people. He was alone because people had decided he wasn't worth their time. And the one person who'd bothered to remember he existed, just once a year with a cheap card and a simple message, that person got everything he'd built. This wasn't an inheritance. This was a test. I stood there for probably an hour, just looking at those cards, thinking about what it meant to be remembered, thinking about what it cost Uncle Earl to live the way he did, thinking about Rick's smug face when he offered me $500 for a man's entire life's work. My phone rang. It was Linda. She wanted to know when I was coming home, so we could discuss next steps with Rick. Her voice had that edge to it, the edge that said she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for me to agree. I looked at those cards one more time. Then I called her back. I told her I wasn't selling, that I was keeping the property, that I was going to figure out what Earl's Earth actually was and make it work. The silence on the other end lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then I heard her take a breath, and I knew what was coming. She asked if I'd lost my mind, asked if I understood what I was throwing away. Our stability, our future, our marriage. She said, though she didn't put exactly like that. She said she couldn't do this. Couldn't be married to someone who chose garbage over his family. I tried to explain about the cards, about what they meant. about dignity and respect and not letting people be forgotten, she hung up on me. I stood there in that trailer, listening to the dial tone, surrounded by 15 years of Christmas cards that nobody else thought mattered. Outside, the mountains of compost sat under their tarps. 40 acres of potential or ruin, depending on who you asked. Linda's family thought I was an idiot. Linda herself thought I was throwing our life away. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was about to lose everything for nothing. But when I looked at that wall, at those carefully preserved cards, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Uncle Earl had built something out here. Something that made enough money to pay for 40 acres of land, even if he'd fallen behind on the taxes. Something that was worth protecting in his will. And he'd trusted me with it. Not because I was smart or successful or impressive, but because I'd treated him like a person. The drive back felt longer than it should have. I kept rehearsing conversations in my head. Things I'd say to Linda. Ways I'd explain it. But I knew it didn't matter. She'd already chosen her family over me. Over this. Over whatever this was going to become. When I got home, she was packing a bag. Not everything. Just enough for a few days at her parents' house. She didn't say she needed space to think. Didn't say anything at all, actually. Just moved around the bedroom, folding clothes, not looking at me. I stood in the doorway and watched. Wanted to say something. Wanted to explain about the cards, about what they meant, about dignity and not letting people be forgotten. But her silence was louder than any argument could have been. She zipped the bag, picked up her keys, walked past me without a word. The front door closing behind her was the quietest, loudest sound I'd ever heard. The house felt empty after she left. Not sad empty, just quiet, like something that had been humming in the background for years, had finally been turned off. I made myself dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, ate it standing at the counter. Then I went to my computer and started researching. Composting, vermicompost, red wigglers, aerobic decomposition. I read article after article, trying to understand what Uncle Earl had actually been doing out there, but the numbers didn't add up. Even if he was selling compost, how much could dirt possibly be worth? Enough to pay for 40 acres? The math didn't make sense. I had more questions than answers. Still, it was something, a direction, a starting point. I sat there until past midnight, staring at my laptop screen, at the bank app showing $847 in checking, at the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, at the property tax bill I'd printed out, $12,000. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out how to pay that, how to learn a business I didn't understand, how to prove to everyone who'd given up on me, including my wife, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. But tonight, I just sat there, thinking about Christmas cards on a wall, about a man who died alone but not forgotten, about the difference between being abandoned and choosing solitude. And I thought about that $500 Rick had offered me. $500 for 40 acres and a lifetime of work. The disrespect of it, the casual cruelty. I decided right then that if I was going to fail, I'd fail trying. But if I succeeded, I'd make damn sure that everyone who'd written me off knew exactly what they'd walked away from. Linda was gone. My in-laws thought I was an idiot. I owned 40 acres of rotting garbage that might be worthless or might be something I couldn't even see yet. I had no idea that garbage was about to save my life. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. I was still living in the house technically, though Linda had been staying at her parents' place for 2 weeks by then. The envelope was from a law firm I'd never heard of. Not some big corporate place, just one of those strip mall operations with names like Johnson and Associates. Inside were 20 pages of legal jargon that basically said she wanted out and she wanted everything. The house, her car, my retirement account, even the furniture we bought together. Everything that was clean, liquid, easy to split. She didn't want the farm. Didn't even mention it in the initial filing. I should have been devastated. 10 years of marriage ending with a FedEx envelope and a court date. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being looked at like I was a walking disappointment. Tired of defending a decision nobody else understood. Her lawyer called me that afternoon. Some guy named Patterson who sounded like he was reading off a script. He explained that Linda was willing to do an uncontested divorce if I was reasonable. That meant no drama, no court battles, just sign the papers and move on with our lives. I asked what reasonable meant. He laid it out. She gets the house, which still had equity in it despite the mortgage. She gets her Ford Escape. She gets my 401k, which had about 40 grand in it after years of automatic deductions I barely noticed. I get to keep Earl's Earth and whatever debts came with it. I almost laughed. She thought she was screwing me, taking everything of value and leaving me with a toxic waste dump that would probably bankrupt me within 6 months. I told Patterson I'd agree to everything. No fight, no contest. I'd sign whatever they put in front of me. He sounded surprised, said he'd draw up the marital settlement agreement and have it ready by the end of the week. Then I asked him to add one more document, a quitclaim deed. Linda would sign over any and all rights to property known as Earl's Earth, permanently and irrevocably. No future claims. No community property arguments. She walks away clean. I keep the mess. Patterson paused, asked if I was sure, said that if the property ever became valuable, this document would prevent her from claiming any stake in it. I told him I was sure, that I wanted it in writing, that she wanted nothing to do with it, that this pile of garbage, as her family kept calling it, was 100% mine. He said he'd include it, would have everything ready for signatures on Friday. I hung up and sat there in the empty house. The same house I'd been paying a mortgage on for 8 years. The same house where Linda had picked out every piece of furniture, every paint color, every stupid decorative pillow that served no actual purpose. She could have it all. I didn't care anymore. The only thing that mattered was sitting on 40 acres of mud and compost, and it was about to be legally, completely, inarguably mine. Friday came. The lawyer's office was in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner and a nail salon. The smell of chemical solvents leaked through the walls. Linda showed up with her mother and Rick. I came alone. Didn't have anyone to bring even if I'd wanted to. We sat on opposite sides of a conference table that was too big for the room. Linda wouldn't look at me. Her mother kept making these theatrical sighing sounds like this was all so tragic. Rick had his arms crossed, wearing that same smirk he'd worn since they were reading. Patterson went through the documents page by page. The settlement agreement, the quitclaim deed, the financial disclosures. Everything spelled out in precise legal language. When we got to the section about Earl's Earth, Patterson read it out loud. The property was designated as a non-liquid asset with negative equity, meaning it was worth less than the debts attached to it. Linda would relinquish all current and future claims to said property in exchange for sole ownership of the marital home and associated assets. Rick actually laughed, told Linda she was getting the deal of the century, said that even if I somehow managed not to get arrested for environmental violations, the property would never be worth more than the back taxes I'd have to keep paying. Linda's mother agreed, said they were being generous taking the house, that they were essentially doing me a favor by relieving me of that burden. Linda finally spoke. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She said she didn't want her name attached to that pile of filth. Not now, not ever. She wanted it in writing that she'd had nothing to do with my terrible decision. Patterson slid the quitclaim deed across the table. Linda signed it without reading it. Didn't even hesitate. Just scribbled her signature like she was signing a credit card receipt at a restaurant. Rick signed as a witness. So did Linda's mother. Patterson notarized it right there, pressing his seal into the paper with a heavy metal stamp that made a satisfying thunk. Then he made copies. One for his file. One for Linda. One for me. He said he'd file the original with the county clerk's office within 48 hours, making it part of the public record. That was important. Not just signed. Filed. Official. Permanent. We signed the rest of the documents. The settlement agreement. The dissolution of marriage paperwork. All of it neat and tidy and uncontested. I walked out of that office with nothing but the clothes on my back and the keys to a property everyone thought was worthless. Linda drove away in her Ford Escape with her mother in the passenger seat. Rick followed in his Lexus. I stood in the parking lot next to the dry cleaner, watching them leave. The divorce was final pending a judge's signature, which was just a formality at this point. 6 weeks, and I'd officially be single again. I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but free. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I drove out to the farm in a truck I'd bought 2 days earlier for $1,200 cash. It was a 1998 Ford F-250 with 200,000 miles on it, rust around the wheel wells, and a transmission that clunked when you shifted into third. But it ran and it could haul, which was all that mattered. The bank account was empty. I'd taken every dollar I had left after paying the property taxes and put it toward getting mobile. The truck, insurance, gas money. I had maybe $200 left for food. The house was gone. The retirement money was gone. The life I'd been living was gone. All I had was 40 acres and a theory that maybe, just maybe, Uncle Earl had known something nobody else could see. The trailer was exactly as I'd left it. Cold, Spartan smelling faintly of mildew and old coffee. The space heater Earl had used was electric, and I couldn't afford to run it constantly. So I kept it off during the day and only turned it on at night when the temperature dropped below freezing. I'd moved my stuff in the week before. A sleeping bag, some clothes, a hot plate, instant ramen, and cans of soup. The basics you need to survive when you're betting everything on a pile of rotting organic matter. The first thing I did was go through Earl's papers. Really go through them this time. Not just skim. He kept everything in old accordion folders, the kind with string ties. Receipts, invoices, ledgers written in pencil on graph paper. The man had documented every transaction, every load, every sale for 20 years. It took me 3 days to figure out the pattern. Earl had contracts with 6 different businesses. A juice processing plant, 2 restaurants that generated massive amounts of food waste, a landscaping company that needed to dispose of grass clippings and yard waste, a small grocery store that threw out produce, a coffee roaster that had pounds of spent grounds every week. Every single contract worked the same way. They paid him a tipping fee to take their waste, usually between $20 and $50 per ton, depending on the material and the distance. He'd drive out with his truck, load up, bring it back to the farm, and add it to the compost piles. Then, once the material had broken down into rich, dark soil, he'd sell it, $50 to $75 per cubic yard to local farms and garden centers. The numbers started making sense. He wasn't making money by producing something and selling it. He was making money twice. Once to accept the raw material, once to sell the finished product. It was brilliant in its simplicity. People would pay to have their waste removed. Then other people would pay to buy that same waste after it had been transformed into something useful. Uncle Earl had figured out how to get paid coming and going. The problem was that most of his old contacts were dead ends. The juice plant had closed 3 years ago. One of the restaurants was under new ownership and had switched to a different hauler. The grocery store was gone completely, replaced by a Dollar General. I'd have to find new clients, build new relationships, start from scratch. I spent a week researching every food processing operation within 50 miles, made a list, checked which ones had the highest waste output, tried to figure out who I could undercut on price. The apple cider mill kept coming up, Valley View cider. They pressed thousands of gallons every fall, which meant tons of apple pomace. The pulp left after pressing. It was wet, heavy, and started fermenting almost immediately if you didn't deal with it fast. I looked up their waste contractor, some regional company that charged them $45 per ton for removal and disposal. I could beat that. I drove out there on a Monday morning. The place was exactly what you'd picture. Old barn converted to a production facility. The smell of apples and yeast hung in the air thick enough to taste. Trucks lined up with crates of fruit waiting to be processed. The owner was a guy named Frank, maybe 60 years old, arms like tree trunks from years of lifting crates. He was skeptical when I introduced myself and told him what I wanted. He asked what made me think I could handle his waste stream. Asked if I knew how much pomace they generated. Asked if I understood that this stuff needed to be hauled away fast, or it would start stinking up the whole operation. I told him I could do it for $30 per ton. Same day pickup. No contracts. Just pay as we go until he was satisfied with the service. Frank studied me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was legitimate or just some idiot who'd be bankrupt in a month. Then he shrugged, said he'd give me a test run. Had 15 tons ready to go right now if I could handle it. I said I could. He walked me around to the back where a mountain of wet, brown pulp sat steaming in the cold air. The smell was intense, sweet and sour and fermenting all at once. The pile was easily 6 feet high and 20 feet across. Frank explained that his current hauler used a dump truck with a mechanical arm. Asked what I was planning to use. I pointed at Earl's old truck, a 1985 dump truck that looked like it had been through a war. Faded red paint, dents in the bed, but the hydraulics worked and the engine, despite sounding like it had emphysema, still ran. Frank looked doubtful. Asked if I was planning to load it by hand. I said yes. He shook his head, told me good luck, said if I could get it done before end of business, he'd pay me in cash. I grabbed the shovel from the truck bed and got to work. It took 6 hours. 6 brutal, back-breaking hours of shoveling wet apple pomace into a truck bed. The stuff was heavy, heavier than it looked. Each shovel load probably weighed 30 pounds, and it didn't want to stay on the shovel. It was slippery and wanted to slide right back off. My back started screaming after the first hour. By hour 2, I developed blisters on my hands that popped and started bleeding. By hour 3, I was running on pure stubbornness. The smell got into everything. My clothes, my hair, my skin, that sweet sour fermentation smell that made you gag if you thought about it too much. But I kept shoveling, load after load after load. Frank came out twice to check on me. Didn't say anything, just watched for a minute and went back inside. I couldn't tell if he was impressed or thought I was crazy. Probably both. When I finally got the last shovelful loaded, the truck bed was heaping. I pulled the tarp over it and tied it down with bungee cords that had probably been there since 1985. I drove back to the farm going 20 miles per hour the whole way, terrified the truck would break down or the tarp would come loose, and I'd lose half my load on the highway. It held. Barely. The engine made noises that engines shouldn't make. The brakes squealed. The whole thing shook at anything over 30 miles per hour. But it made it. I backed up to one of the compost areas and hit the hydraulic switch. The bed lifted with a grinding sound and the pomace slid out in one massive, steaming pile. 15 tons of raw material that I'd gotten paid to accept and would eventually sell for 10 times what it cost me to process, if I didn't die of exhaustion first. I drove back to Valley View just before closing. Frank was in the office doing paperwork. He looked up when I walked in, surprised I'd actually made it back. I told him it was done. All 15 tons hauled away. He nodded slowly, asked if I could do it again next week. Said they have another load ready by Wednesday. I said I could. He opened a cash box and counted out $450. 30 per ton, exactly as agreed. Cash money. No checks. No invoices. Just payment for work done. I took it and thanked him. Told him I'd see him Wednesday. I drove back to farm as the sun was setting. Everything hurt. My back, my hands, my shoulders. I was pretty sure I'd pulled something in my lower back that wasn't going to feel better anytime soon. But I had $450 in my pocket. Money I'd earned doing work that everyone said was beneath them. Work that Rick would never do in a million years. Work that Linda couldn't even imagine. I parked the truck and sat there for a minute, looking out at the farm, at the mountains of compost in various stages of breakdown, at the rusty equipment Uncle Earl had used, at the trailer I was living in. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, I heated up a can of soup on the hot plate and ate it sitting on the cot. The space heater hummed in the corner, barely making a dent in the cold. My hands were wrapped in gauze where the blisters had opened up. I counted the money again. $450. After gas and the fee to dispose of the processed compost eventually, I'd net maybe $300. Not enough to live on long term, but enough to buy food for 2 weeks and keep the truck running. On the small table next to the cot, I'd put up one of the Christmas cards from Earl's wall, the one from 2 years ago. It was faded and had a coffee ring on it, but you could still read my handwriting. Merry Christmas, Uncle Earl. I looked at that card and thought about what he'd built here. Not just a business, a life, a way of existing that didn't require approval from people who thought they were better than you. He'd taken everyone's garbage and turned it into something valuable, not by being smart or educated or well-connected, just by working every single day, alone, for 20 years. And now it was my turn. I smiled at that card, at the man who'd left me something more valuable than money. He'd left me a blueprint for how to survive when everyone else had written you off. My hands were shaking from exhaustion as I tucked the cash into an envelope, but they were good shakes, the kind that come from honest work. Tomorrow I'd wake up and do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until everyone who'd laughed at me choked on their own words. A year passed before I realized I'd stopped counting days. The work became rhythm. Wake up before dawn, check the compost temperatures with the probe thermometer I'd bought, move material with the small excavator I'd leased, load trucks, make deliveries, come back covered in dirt and sweat, sleep hard, repeat. Valley View Cider became my anchor client. Frank gave me a standing contract after the first 3 months. Every week like clockwork, I'd haul away their apple pomace. Then I added a restaurant downtown that generated 2 tons of food waste weekly. Then a landscaping company that needed somewhere to dump grass clippings and yard debris. The money started adding up, not fast, but steady. I hired my first employee in month 4, guy named Martinez, former Marine who'd done 3 tours and came back to a job market that didn't know what to do with him. Didn't talk much, just worked. Exactly what I needed. By month 8, I had 3 guys working for me, all veterans. All the kind of men who understood that sometimes the best therapy is loading a truck until your arms go numb. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about tonnage and moisture content and carbon to nitrogen ratios. We talked about which pile was ready to turn and which one needed more time. We built something together without having to explain why it mattered. I took out a lease on a Sandvik screener, the kind of machine that separates finished compost from the chunks that need more time. Cost me $2,000 a month, but increased my output by 300%. Then I bought a conveyor system from a bankrupt concrete plant for $5,000 cash. The operation started looking less like a junkyard and more like an actual business. That's when the EPA showed up. I was in the middle of turning a pile with the excavator when I saw the white sedan pull up to the gate. Government plates. A woman in a blazer and sensible shoes got out, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that said she'd seen every environmental violation in the book and expected to see a few more today. My stomach dropped. This was it. The thing Rick had warned about. The thing Linda's family had been sure would destroy me. One bad inspection, and I'd be looking at $50,000 in daily fines until I fixed whatever was wrong. If I couldn't fix it fast, the business was over. Martinez saw my face and cut the engine on the loader he was operating. The sudden silence felt ominous. The inspector introduced herself as Jennifer Chun from the regional EPA office. Said they received complaints about odor and potential groundwater contamination. Asked if I had permits for operating a composting facility. I did. I'd spent 3 weeks navigating bureaucracy to get them, filed all the paperwork, paid all the fees, did everything by the book because I knew this day would come. I showed her the permits. She studied them carefully, making notes on her clipboard. Then she asked to see the operation. I walked her through everything, showed her the aerated static pile system I designed using my old engineering degree that everyone thought was useless, explained how the perforated pipes forced air through the material, maintaining the ideal temperature for microbial activity. Pointed out the temperature probes that logged data every hour. She checked the logs, saw that every pile was maintaining between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius, the perfect range for killing pathogens while maximizing decomposition. She asked about runoff. I showed her the berms I'd built to contain any liquid, the collection system that fed into a retention pond, the water testing results I'd paid a lab to run every month showing zero contamination. She walked around the property for an hour, taking samples, measuring distances from property lines, checking wind direction. Finally, she stopped in front of one of the active piles. Steam was rising off it in the cold morning air. She leaned in and sniffed. I held my breath. She turned to me with a surprised expression, said it smelled like forest floor, like rich earth, nothing like the complaints described. I explained that proper aeration eliminates the anaerobic bacteria that cause a stink. If you're doing it right, compost shouldn't smell bad at all. It should smell like life. She made more notes, took more samples, said she'd have a report done within 2 weeks. When she left, I was sure I was finished. The report came back 10 days later. Not only had I passed inspection, but Shun had recommended the facility for green business certification. Said my operation was a model for how organic waste management should be done. She included a note saying that whoever had filed the complaints clearly hadn't visited the property in months, if ever, that the allegations were baseless and possibly motivated by spite rather than legitimate environmental concern. I knew exactly who had filed those complaints. Rick had tried one last time to destroy me, and it had backfired spectacularly. The certification letter went up on the wall of the trailer, right next to Uncle Earl's Christmas cards. That certification changed everything. Suddenly I had credibility. Suddenly the big players started returning my calls. Agricultural operations that had ignored me before wanted to know more about my product. I started thinking bigger, started researching who needed what I was producing. That's when I found out about the organic farming boom. Vineyards that were transitioning away from chemical fertilizers. Specialty crop operations that needed living soil to meet certification requirements. And then the state legalized medical cannabis cultivation. Within 6 months, there were a dozen new grow operations setting up. All of them needed the same thing. Clean, organic, biologically active growing medium. The kind of soil that could pass laboratory analysis for pesticide residues and heavy metals. The kind of soil where beneficial microbes thrived. The kind of soil I was producing by the truckload. I rebranded, had a graphic designer create a logo, Earl's Black Gold, in bold letters over an image of rich, dark soil. Had it printed on bags, on truck magnets, on business cards. Sent samples to 4 different grow operations with a simple pitch. Test it. If your plants grow better, buy more. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the biggest operation in the region. Green leaf cultivation, 40,000 square feet of grow space. They tested my soil against 3 competitors. Mine wasn't just better. It was in a different league. The lab report showed microbial diversity 50 times higher than standard potting soil. Mycorrhizal fungi counts that made the lab tech call me personally to ask how I'd achieved it. NPK ratios perfectly balanced for vegetative growth. Greenleaf wanted to meet. Their head grower was a guy named David Chun. No relation to the EPA inspector, but equally thorough. He showed up to the farm in a Tesla, wearing designer jeans and a Patagonia jacket. The kind of person who probably never thought they'd be standing in a compost yard talking to a guy in muddy Carhartts. But he looked at my operation with respect, asked technical questions about inoculation methods and curing times, wanted to see the temperature logs, wanted to know my quality control process. I showed him everything, the screening process, the testing protocol, the way we age material for a minimum of 6 months before sale, the way we mix different batches to maintain consistency. He took samples back to his lab, tested them again, came back a week later with a purchase order, 50 cubic yards per month to start, $400 per yard, $20,000 a month in revenue from one client. He said if the first batch performed well, they'd triple the order. I hired 2 more employees that week. The next 6 months were a blur. More clients, more contracts, bigger orders. I leased land from the neighboring property to expand the operation, bought 2 new dump trucks, hired an actual bookkeeper because I couldn't keep track anymore. The money stopped being something I counted and started being something I managed. I opened a business checking account that actually had a cushion in it, paid myself a salary for the first time, a real salary, the kind where you don't have to check your balance before buying groceries. I bought a new truck, Nothing fancy, just a reliable F-250 that didn't sound like it was dying every time I started it. Felt like a millionaire driving it off the lot. Martinez asked me one day why I didn't move out of the trailer. Get a real place. I told him I would eventually, but not yet. The trailer kept me focused, kept me remembering where I'd started. 2 years after the divorce, I had 7 employees and contracts with 16 major clients. The operation was processing 200 tons of organic material per week. The profit margins were better than anything I'd imagined. I built a proper office. Nothing fancy, but professional. Glass front, insulated walls, actual climate control. Put my desk where I could see the whole operation through the window. That's where I was sitting when Linda showed up. I saw her car pull up to the gate. Same Ford Escape from the divorce. Except now it looked old. Worn. She'd aged more than 2 years should account for. Her clothes were cheaper. Her hair was different. She asked the gate guard if she could speak to me. He called the office. Asked if I wanted to see her. I almost said no. Almost told him to send her away. But curiosity got the better of me. She walked into my office like she was walking into a church, taking it all in. The frame certifications on the wall. The computer monitors showing real-time temperature data from the compost piles. The professional furniture that didn't come from IKEA. She looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Regret. Real, genuine regret. She said she'd seen the article in the Regional Business Journal. Earl's Black Gold named one of the fastest-growing AG businesses in the state. Photos of the operation. Interview with me talking about sustainable waste management. She said she'd made a mistake. That she'd been scared, that her family had pressured her, that if she'd known then what she knew now, everything would have been different. I didn't say anything, just let her talk. Let her explain how things had been hard, how the money from the house had run out faster than expected, how she was working as an office administrator now, barely making enough to cover rent. She said Uncle Earl would have wanted us to be together, that he'd left me the farm because he believed in family, that maybe we could find a way back to what we had. I sat there in silence. The silence itself was an answer. She was still talking when my office door burst open. Rick stormed in with a man in a cheap suit. Lawyer, clearly. Rick looked worse than Linda. Whatever real estate ventures he'd been working on had clearly failed. His suit didn't fit right anymore. His hairline had receded. He had the desperate look of a man who bet everything and lost. He started yelling before he was fully through the door. Said this business had been built during my marriage to his sister. That made it community property under state law. That Linda was entitled to 50% of the equity. That they'd already consulted with an attorney and were prepared to file suit. Linda's expression changed. The regret disappeared. She nodded along with Rick's rant. Said it was only fair. That she'd supported me during the marriage. That she deserved to share in the success. The lawyer tried to sound more professional, said they could settle this civilly, that I should understand their position, that legally they had a strong case for claiming Linda's share of marital assets. I let them finish, let them lay out their whole argument, let Rick work himself up into a red-faced fury about how I owed them, how I'd gotten lucky, how this windfall should be shared. Then I picked up the phone on my desk, called my assistant Janice, asked her to bring me the blue folder from the filing cabinet. Rick kept ranting, said I couldn't scare them with paperwork, that they had rights, that they'd take this all the way to court if they had to. Janice came in with the folder, set it on my desk, left without a word. I opened it, pulled out one document, slid it across the desk to the lawyer. It was a quitclaim deed from 2 years ago. Linda's signature, Rick's signature as witness, the notary seal, the county clerk stamp showing it had been officially recorded. I spoke for the first time since they'd walked in, told them to read it carefully. The lawyer picked it up, started reading. His face changed as he processed what he was looking at. Linda demanded to know what it was. Rick grabbed it from the lawyer's hands. I explained it for them. 2 years ago, when we divorced, Linda had signed complete rights to Earl's earth over to me. The document specifically stated she was relinquishing all claims, current and future, to the property and any business associated with it. The property had been assessed at that time as having negative equity, meaning it was worth less than the debts attached to it. She wanted nothing to do with it, had insisted her name not be attached to what she called a pile of filth. Rick was shaking his head, said that wasn't legal, that she'd been under duress, that they could challenge it. The lawyer cut him off, said quietly that the document was ironclad, notarized, filed with the county, voluntarily signed during an uncontested divorce proceeding, that any judge would uphold it, that if they filed suit, I could countersue for legal fees and probably win. He told Rick they should leave. Now, Rick started yelling, called me every name in the book, said I'd manipulated Linda, that I'd tricked her, that this was theft. I pressed a button on my desk that called security. Linda was crying, asked how I could do this to her, how I could be so cold, how I could let her sign away a fortune. I finally spoke to her directly, told her I didn't let her do anything. She'd made a choice. She looked at what Uncle Earl left me and decided it was garbage, decided it was worthless, decided she didn't want any part of it. I told her she'd been right about one thing. This business did start during our marriage, started the day she walked out, started the day she chose her family's opinions over me, started the day she made it crystal clear she thought I was a failure. Every shovel of compost I'd loaded, every 16-hour day, every bleeding hand and pulled muscle. That's what built this business. Not the marriage. The end of the marriage. Security arrived. 2 guys I'd hired specifically because they were big and looked intimidating. Asked if there was a problem. Rick was still yelling as they escorted him out, making threats, saying he'd find a way, that this wasn't over. The lawyer followed quickly, probably already planning how to avoid malpractice claims for bringing a case this week. Linda walked out last. Didn't fight. Just looked back once with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe understanding. Maybe just defeat. The door closed behind them. The office went quiet except for the hum of the HVAC system. I sat there for a minute. Didn't feel victorious. Didn't feel anything much at all. Then I got up and went back to work. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stood at the fence line looking out over the operation. 40 acres that had once been just piles of garbage and broken dreams. Now it was rows of precisely managed compost windrows. 3 dump trucks with Earl's black gold logos. A loader, a screener, a fleet of equipment that actually worked. 7 good people with steady jobs. The phone in my pocket buzzed. Bank notification. End of month revenue, $187,000. After expenses and payroll, profit, $94,000. 1 month. More money than I'd made in a year at my old job. 7 figures in the business account. Real money. Generational money if I managed it right. I walked back to my truck. The old trailer was still there, but I didn't live in it anymore. Had a small house now. Nothing fancy, just comfortable. But I kept the trailer. Kept Uncle Earl's cards on the wall. Kept it as a reminder. Inside, I picked up one of those cards. The one from 3 years ago. Yellowed paper. Simple message in my handwriting. I said out loud what I'd been thinking since Linda walked out my office. We did it, Uncle Earl. They laughed at both of us. Called us garbage. Threw us away like we were nothing. And we turned that garbage into gold. I put the card back carefully. Tomorrow would bring more work. More clients. More growth. The operation was expanding into commercial landscaping supplies. Municipal contracts were coming in. There was talk of franchising the model to other regions. But tonight, I just stood there in that old trailer, where I'd started with nothing, where I'd counted my first $450 with shaking hands, where I'd learned that sometimes the things people throw away are the most valuable things of all. Not the compost, not the business, not even the money. The lesson, the one Uncle Earl had tried to teach anyone who'd listen. That dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you build yourself one shovel load at a time, whether anyone believes in you or not. I turned off the light and locked the door. The farm would be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, built on garbage and Christmas cards, and the fact that sometimes the people who write you off are doing you the biggest favor of your life.